You ready to keep your composure, Hollis? We are live, brother.
I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can contain it.
I really. If we were richer people right now, what you'd be seeing is balloons and confetti and streamers, and we'd all be drinking out of red Solo cups and all that fancy stuff that you do at a 5-year-old's birthday. Bad publicity. This is our 5-year anniversary. Netrunner moved into 5 years a month or so back, and from there, shortly after Netrunner's creation, Bad Publicity started. We were all hanging out, got a message from our good friend Michael here, who said, you know what, let me get in on that 5-year adventure.
Gotta be a part of it. Yeah.
Gotta be. Only shows up for good milestones.
That's a requirement. If it's not a good milestone, I'm not even interested.
Mr. Boggs, thank you for taking the time out of your day to grace us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's good to be back.
Alec and Hollis, what have you guys been up to? You want to say thanks or, give a birthday toast?
I mean, Boggs is okay. No, no, actually,
yes.
I do want to. Honestly, Boggs, it's awesome to have you on. I know that scheduling is complicated for whenever we try to get people on to be special guests, because you can only talk about certain things, and when you obviously have to do your job, and that takes a lot of time. You are a very social person. You got things going on in your life, and we're not the only people hitting you up trying to get a bite of your time. So we appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's no problem. I love being on. So thank you guys for having me again.
As far as what I'm doing, nothing. That is what I've been doing. Still Wakanda forever. Still a lot of excitement for the upcoming cards, and a lot of excitement for cards that are already out that are actually blowing my mind. Boggs, we're going to talk about it tonight. Okay, just expect it.
Yeah,
looking forward to it.
Alec,
I'm gonna brace myself.
I'm still rolling, man. I'm really enjoying Netrunner at the moment. It's been really fresh and interesting. Every new pack comes with new twists and exciting new deck ideas and details. And we got one more store champ left in our area, and then we're looking ahead to regionals, and that's an exciting place to be. So Katara Cycle is been really fantastic so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes.
That's awesome. That's good to hear.
So, Michael, how about yourself? Since the last time we saw you, things have changed.
A little bit.
The world of Netrunner has changed. How's things been on that front with you?
Oh, it's been really exciting seeing cards that I had a hand in that I was able to sort of kind of put my creative focus into, I guess. Seeing people play with those and seeing those just really come out and people have fun with them has been amazing. So that's been a lot of fun. Keeping up with all the metas and doing the MWL stuff, that's been a lot of fun. It's been a blast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
So has everything caught up now? Is it just status quo? When you walk into a game store and you see like you said, cards that you've designed and actually put the blood, sweat, and tears of work in, seeing them being played and enjoyed, is that just regular now?
I mean, kind of, yeah, a little bit. There's when the first pack of Katara came out, Sovereign Sight, I don't know. There was kind of a moment where I was sort of in a state of, I don't know, I guess disbelief, for lack of a better word. I'd never gone through that experience of being hey, I made that and people are playing with it. But yeah, I mean, since then it's sort of been, I don't know, you kind of get used to it, but at the same time you don't. So I'll see people play with NGO Front, which was one of my favorite cards during testing, and I'm oh yeah, that's a really fun card. I'm oh, I made that card. That's actually pretty cool. So it's, I don't know, it's sometimes I forget about it and it's not a big deal, and then other times I'm just no, that's actually really awesome. So I think that effect is probably going to stay with me for a long time.
So I'll tangent from that point. If NGO front, you brought it up, not me. How long till that is most wanted listed?
That's a good question. Just use expose effects. That's what you need. You just need that one infiltration, and you don't have to worry about it.
Or run interdiction. There you go. That's been the spicy tech online, is some interdiction.
So, yeah, that card's it's really powerful, but I think that Glacier needed it. And I definitely think it's one of those cards that, like, if it stays prevalent in the meta, it's going to force people to potentially weigh other options that they normally wouldn't consider. So, obviously, if it's too much for too long, yeah, I could see the MWL. But
no, I joke because I think it's a card that works on something that we haven't seen before in previous packs. To be able to hot pop that and use the trash ability and get a return on investment for your advancement tokens. I just think it's going to be incredibly powerful because it changes the game, like you said, right? Like it's going to force people to play and think a little bit differently, and sometimes people don't like that.
That's true. I mean, yeah, there's definitely a certain class of player that sort of gets into the play style that they like, and it's not fun for them to have to kind of be forced out of it by other cards and stuff. So there are definitely people who don't enjoy that, but I think that overall those types of cards that sort of shake things up and make things different are usually good for the game.
And we've talked on this cast a little bit specifically about this card and how in some ways it's coming out, it's a new effect, it's a new kind of challenge that a lot of runners now have to be thinking about in these games. And we were saying, like with other strong effects that have come out in the game in the past, there's a period of time where players sort of get used to these powerful cards and start to better play around them. So if you see someone naked install double advance a card, you might go like, well, how likely do I think it is that it's this bluff, and you do or don't waste your time with it. And that it's just a matter of sort of practice and skill and familiarity with other players. So yeah, I think it's a really neat, trappy kind of thing that will only get better as the game matures in terms of players being able to play with it and around it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So then let's go into the Wayback Playback machine and talk about what happened at Worlds. When you saw the decks that won Worlds, were you half expecting that still?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, there's always going to be a dominant deck or some dominant builds. I was actually pretty happy with the variety at Worlds overall, even though like CI won and Haley won. There were still quite a few different runners. There were quite a few different corps. Yeah, it was. I was expecting it a little bit, and even though it turned out that way, I was happy overall with just the diversity within kind of the whole greater Worlds meta. But I'm hoping that with the new MWL update and stuff, we'll see less of that CI dominance. We'll kind of bring even more diversity into the meta, because as happy as I was with Worlds, there was a little part of me that wished that it was a little less dominated by CI.
Anything from you guys? You want to talk about what happened at Worlds or something?
I was just curious how you felt in a position of a judge there at the table, kind of watching players play and being in that highly intense competitive space of making sure they're not messing things up or dealing with rules questions. Like, how was that experience?
It is nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of it. It's part of the job, and I'm happy to do it. But it's especially at that level of play, a wrong call can just mess up everything for a person who might have, traveled from really far or saved for a long time to get there, or might have practiced for months and months and months. So it's one of those things too. Like, obviously, I kind of understand the rules of the game. So when somebody calls me over and they ask me a question, like, I know the answer, but sometimes I'll start to like almost double question myself, and I'm like, oh, it's this. I'm like, what if it's not that? And then I just get really nervous in those situations. And it's I was actually really fortunate to have the judges that I did at Worlds, because they were very helpful. Whenever there was any sort of situation, they were easy to talk to and kind of come to a conclusion on. And then obviously all the OP people were around and stuff. So it went pretty smoothly, but it was still pretty nerve-wracking. And I'm hoping that over time it'll become less and less so. It's I think just never having to experience an event quite of that size before was a bit overwhelming, but I'm hoping that next Worlds is even better than this last one.
Nice.
Were you guys happy with the state that rotation took before Worlds, like creating that pool, and do you think rotation did what it needed to do?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it kind of caught some people off guard, but I think overall that was probably for the best. I think that, the decks that were dominant at that time were suddenly, everything was shaken up and nobody knew quite what deck to choose, which way to go. So yeah, I think that it definitely succeeded in sort of like kind of changing things for the better overall.
I know the answer to this one is probably going to be a wait and see kind of thing, but is when we did our big Gen Con interview with your big boss, we did talk about a little bit so Netrunner is like officially the first game to come into rotation, and they really didn't know what to expect and all that stuff. And it's not like we haven't seen. They're not rules mechanics, but mechanics that govern the state of Netrunner have changed. For example, of where they said, we saw a new core set, and we saw cards kind of be moved from the first cycles into the core set, and some cards rotated out. So we know that, when you say the core set will never, be solidified forever, that kind of rule was broken already. Will we see like a change to maybe rotation, like a more aggressive rotation in the past, now that we've seen what it can do?
There's definitely potential. I like the original article that came out however long ago, I think it was like 2014, explaining what rotation was and how it worked and all that stuff. I think at the time, there was a little bit of I would imagine that when they were putting that together, there was a little bit of there had to be a certain level of guessing. Like, when we get to this point, we're hoping that everything will sort of rotate naturally and work out. And as time goes on, they decided that the revised core was actually the way to go. And I could definitely see a situation as we go forward where we make decisions that are similar to that. Maybe X and Y aren't working, so we might change it in some way. I think it's definitely a possibility. I don't know if anything like that will happen, but I know that we're open to always finding a better way if there is one.
Yeah, because I know it's really something that it's released, until you hit the, if you walk past a Ticket to Ride box and it's like sold 4 million copies or something, right? Like physical game numbers, like board game numbers, are really not something that is put out there. But I do think that, from talking with people, from hosting the cast, from seeing the level of excitement around that time, I feel like this new cycle and rotation really did what you guys kind of wanted it to do, which was breathe new life back into the game. Not that it needed it, but it was it was a weird roller coaster of a cycle about players in, players out for a bit, and about people not being able to get in, that barrier of entry and stuff like that. So I think that that rotation has been that healthy, kick again, and I hope that's what you guys are seeing too. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. I Damon and Lucas put the whole revised core idea together, and I think all of that rotation, the revised core, everything, just sort of it's definitely helped revitalize at least the competitive scene. I know I've had a lot of people tell me that they're seeing new players in their meta, that their store champs are bigger than they've been in the last few years. So that's really refreshing to hear, and I'm very happy with how everything has worked out concerning rotation in the revised core. I think everybody at FFG is.
I'd love to see it corrected in the chat, but Michael, maybe is Netrunner now the longest LCG, or was Game of Thrones First Edition out longer before it got rebooted?
I believe Game of Thrones was out longer. I think it hit 6 years or 7 years. I could be wrong. I never actually played First Edition, and I'm not very familiar with it. But I thought that I heard around the office that it went for a pretty long time before it got rebooted. So, yeah, Netrunner's definitely getting up there, but I think Game of Thrones might beat it by a year or so.
Well, I mean, the way Netrunner's going, it looks like we will be surpassing that, and it will be the new gold standard for living card games, probably.
For sure, yeah.
Hollis, Alec, you guys have anything on those topics?
Yeah, so I wanted to, I think, segue into something I'm really excited to hear a bit more about, which is the new option for players getting into the game, that is Reign and Reverie. This box that has been, as the article states, I think set up in a really nice way to say, hey, you've got your core set. Now here's this deluxe experience that has options for everybody. Go ahead and try this out, and you can sort of get a greater depth of mechanics and whatnot. And I think that's really exciting. So how do you think that sort of has potential for the game going forward? And how do you see that box's experience panning out for new players coming in?
I'm really excited for it. I'm hoping that the fact that you can get all the factions in one box. I hope that's a huge selling point for newer players, experienced players as well. But I remember as a player that sometimes it was somewhat ambiguous in which pack I should go with next. The obvious answer is pick the one you choose, and that's the great thing about the LCG model. But at the same time, there is a certain level of kind of helpfulness in having a big box that is a little more diverse, a little more varied, rather than the previous, just one faction, one corp, one runner. So yeah, I'm hoping that this really ends up being a great product for new players to sort of expand their collection with, and at the same time, getting these new cards is going to help reinforce the fact that, hey, I like Shaper, maybe I should go with Creation and Control, or hey, I like Anarch, maybe I should go with Order and Chaos. And then from there, you can say, well, I really enjoy Wayland now, so I'm going to pick up these data packs, and it helps direct players a little bit better, but without really holding their hand at the same time.
Was that a your call decision?
It was sort of a group effort. I think when we decided to do this style of box to sort of change things up a little bit, we thought that it might be interesting to sort of focus on all the factions at once, more or less to kind of change up the pace of things, but at the same time just to sort of create this nice guided product that does help people out. So I was part of the discussion. It wasn't ultimately my decision, but I was definitely part of the whole thing.
It was really a breath of fresh air. It's for me to see that, to see just difference. I can't tell you which one I like better or which one I prefer, because it was always cool when whatever faction that you like, if you are a straight out faction player and I play this, I'm playing Shaper forever and ever, forget the rest, or I'm playing Criminal or one of the later
there
ones.
you go, that's the correct one.
Right. So I think it was kind of cool when you're waiting, when you knew your big box time was coming, right? So
yeah.
So, but to see something like this happen after the rotation, after we're really pushing new players into it, and to be able to give another full buffet spread of cards from across the game, I just think it's really good timing to try something like that. And we've seen you guys take risks before, right? With Terminal Directive, and this kind of mixed box style. So I don't know what we'll see going forward, but like I said, I think it's pretty much 50-50. It's cool, and we welcome the change.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Yeah, I've been really happy with all of the reception that I've seen so far. So I'm excited to see what people think about the box when it finally releases.
I'm excited to just see that you guys are pumping new IDs in that box for each faction.
Yeah.
I think that's
a lot of fun.
That's going to be a crazy shot in the arm, I believe, because we're already seeing we're getting every faction will get an ID this cycle, and now we're getting another box for more options. You know, like there is no better time to be a new player right now. You guys are really spreading that around. Is that the focus? Like, how are you balancing the reset of the game, so to speak, with revised core, new player entry now that rotation has happened and all this stuff? Is it something that's always in the back of your mind more than the players that have been there from the beginning?
I mean, honestly, yeah, a little bit. It's competitive players are, no matter what the product is, a truly competitive player is going to be able to turn that product into something competitive. They're going to be able to find the most efficient cards. They're going to be able to find the strongest cards, and they'll say that I'm only going to play with these, and I'm not going to play with anything else that isn't just top efficiency. So whenever, especially with the revised core, realizing that we had such a cool, revitalizing experience for new people to come into, or returning players to come into, and sort of taking that and magnifying it, it's been a really big goal of ours over the last couple months. So I think that new and returning players are very much the focus, because at the end of the day, like, competitive players are going to be able to find cards among those cards that are a little more I don't want to say casually focused, but maybe a little more new player friendly. They're still going to be able to find cards and make those a competitive experience.
Can you talk a little bit about what that means from a sort of design and refinement standpoint, to be thinking about these cards as something that a new player is going to be picking up and is going to have to interpret the abilities and the text and sort of parse that design space and mechanics? I just think that's really interesting.
Sure, yeah. I think throughout Katara and Rain and Reverie, I think for me, at the very least, one of my biggest design, I guess, drives or goals was to ensure that these cards were relatively focused and simple and elegant in their design. I didn't want too many cards that were just, walls of text, or that had too many things going on. Also, if you notice, in Katara, we didn't introduce any new mechanics necessarily. It's a lot of stuff that we've done in the past, and we said, oh, there's a lot of design space here. Let's flesh that out and explore it and see where we can get using pre-existing things that we've already created. So I think sort of like limiting the amount of new information that a new player has to kind of wade through, and just keeping everything sort of like focused on, this is your faction, this is what they do well, and these are the cards that work with those types of play styles. That was really the direction that we were trying to go with Katara and Rain and Reverie as well.
Cool. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, sorry, I hate to jump in here. The thing is that people are in chat are saying that the stream keeps jumping in and jumping out. I think they got the bulk of what you were saying, Boggs, but of course there's a delay. So I don't know if they may want you to recap that point and some of what you said.
Sure, yeah, that's fine. Is the stream okay now?
Yeah,
it looks like it's loading now.
Okay. Cool.
So, someone's asking to back up a little bit. Perhaps maybe paraphrase the previous statement. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's fine. It's totally fine. So Katara and Rain and Reverie, they were designed with sort of, I guess, simplicity in mind. We were very much trying to ensure that the cards in each faction were very much focused on that faction's strengths without adding a lot of new mechanics or complicated effects. We wanted to take pre-existing design space and just sort of flesh it out and explore it a little bit more.
Cool.
I think even within that space, there you go. Yeah, I think even within that space, I feel like you've found new little nuances in the mechanics, like reprisals, like the agendas that are triggered, unscored, or stolen, that these themes piggyback on existing ideas, but are sort of little twists on that, which I think are really neat.
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things about Netrunner is that I'm of the opinion that we could probably go for a significant amount of time without adding any new mechanics. I'm not saying we're going to do that, but there's so much design space within Netrunner. There's so much to explore, so many cool things that have yet to be thought of, that it's I'm always excited whenever we can take those mechanics or those things that haven't quite been turned into anything that's like, I keep stuttering, I can't talk today, that haven't been turned into anything, all that realized yet. It's always fun to just sort of take the pre-existing things and flesh them out and give them life.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to chime in about like one of those specific design changes. You just said it, Alec, but for a long portion of the game, since we're taking a trip down memory lane and we're celebrating a 5-year, if we look back over like the last 5 years, right, looking at Netrunner from the start, 5.3s have always, as the economy engine for runners pre-rotation had basically gotten faster and faster and more aggressive. It became alarmingly clear, and it was already pretty clear in the beginning of the game, that 3.2s were the best choice. They gave you a benefit. You could score them out of hand with fast advance options. You could never advance them, so you could always play a bluff. Whereas with 5.3's agendas and 4.2 agendas, it was more difficult to score them. I mean, it's point blank period, because they didn't have the same freedoms as the 3.2s. So when you guys were designing the newer 5.3s, so we're looking at cards like SSL endorsement and the Genteki one, the new 5.3
bacterial programming.
Bacterial programming. Like when you're looking at those 5.3s, the fact that they trigger off of being scored or stolen is a game changer, because now you know that if that card is in your deck, it's going to contribute to helping you win the game, whether you get the points for it or the runner. Mm-hmm. So my question is, when you guys were designing cards in that space, could you tell me maybe a little bit more about that process and tweaking that? It seems like that's a very hard thing to set correctly.
Sure.
To make it strong enough, but not too ridiculous for a scored or stolen ability.
Yeah, well tied in there, Hollis, because I'm seeing that too. Is like, to jump off your last point, Michael, is when you're saying that you're trying to keep the mechanics the same. I feel like there's some cards here that are going to drastically change the way that Netrunner is played. Like Hollis mentioned, some of these 5.3s that have defensive abilities in other factions. Some of these 5.3s that are when scored, no matter what side they are on. NGO front, like there's some big design milestones and hurdles that have been jumped here.
Oh yeah, and that was very much the goal, was to find things that we had not yet done within the space that we had already created. And there's still so much space to explore. So with the 5.3 specifically, those kind of I think when I first came in, there was only one or maybe two defensive 5.3s that we were exploring and playtesting, and as time went on, like, it was just a mechanic that people really enjoyed. Obviously, GFI has always been a pretty powerful card since its release, and so we were sort of trying to, I guess, step on its toes a little bit to give people other options in terms of things that they could 5.3s that they could include in their deck. So it took a while to get to the point where the 5.3s felt good, because some of the abilities have to be insanely powerful to make players want to include them in their deck. But it's such an interesting balance. Like I know there were a couple times playing with SSL endorsement in the past where like my opponent would install advance. I would expose the card, see what it is, and I'd be like, do I want 3 points? Because then I'm going to give them a lot of credits. That's never happened before in Netrunner. So like being able to go through that process and sort of explore that new kind of state of the game was really fun, and it was very exciting to be able to sort of refine all of those and try to get them to the point where people actually wanted to include them in their deck.
Sweet.
I do want to ask this only because I think it perfectly piggybacks off of what this discussion. Although I know you can't give specifics, can we maybe expect some new iterations to also 2-1s? Maybe I know they said you probably won't ever do those again, but can we expect some new iterations to 2-1s and 3-1s?
Oh,
because 3-1s are very with the exception of those 1,000 cuts like archetypes, it's a very difficult agenda outside of that to include in your deck.
For sure. I can't give too much detail. The one thing I will say is maybe.
Okay.
It's a good answer.
I'll say that I like 3-1s. I think they're an interesting card type that, similar to 5-3s, they haven't quite hit their full potential. I think there's a lot of room to explore with them. So it's a possibility that we might see them in the future again.
I'm interested to see your design space and your take on agendas that go over 5.
Oh, I actually think that's a really fun space. Like they're so risky. Do you mean 5 advancements or just like are you talking like 6-4s or
even
7-5?
Anything over the normal something that we've seen, right? Like we've seen Vanity Project, Government Takeover before in the past, but I can't wait to see if we see anything with your touch on it and how you balance the power for the points for the advancements.
I'll say that off the top of my head, anything beyond 5-3, like to get a player to want to include it in their deck, it would have to be almost grossly overpowered in its ability. Like it would just have to do something incredibly ridiculous just because of how much of a liability it is sitting around in your deck. Like even if you look at like Government Takeover, it has an amazing click ability, but like it's too much of a risk to put in your deck and to install. Like if the runner gets to it, it's just like, okay, well that's the end of the game. Thanks for playing. So
that's why you never install it. You biotic labor Red Planet couriers, and then
that's true.
Boom.
That is one way to do it.
Score it out of hand.
So, as long as people have ways sort of around those situations where they're letting their agendas be vulnerable, or if the agendas do something to either protect themselves or push forward the corpse game state once they're stolen, then I think it's I think people will play them, and I think it's certainly an interesting design space to explore. I would be excited to explore something beyond a 5-3, but I will say that it would probably be pretty difficult to get into that place. Anyone watching, I promise I can talk. Just today is the exception. I don't know why, but I can't make words today. Words are hard.
Well, some of the stutters might be used. Some of them might be the stream. Hopefully it all comes out of the wash.
It's all.
Yeah, that's right. It's just the stream. Don't worry, guys. Yeah. Perfectly clear on our end. So I've got a question for you on this cycle. An observation that I have had, which I found to be really interesting, is as I've been looking through these first 3 packs, the thing that I'm noticing is the number of pips that influence average on the whole. I think for cards that we've seen this cycle is pretty high, I think, relative to past cycles on average. And I'm wondering how much of that was a really intentional choice and what you think that does for cards in this cycle to have those higher costs.
I think that pushing cards back into their the factions that they're supposed to be in is really key for the future of Netrunner. I think we've seen a little too much splashing of like these really powerful mechanics in the past, things that probably should have stayed in the faction that they were intended for, but they only costed 1 or 2 influence, and so everybody used them. I think Temujin is actually a great example of that. I've always been of the mind that if Temujin floated around like 4, probably 5 influence, then it would have never been removed. It's a super powerful card, and it really would have kept criminal at the top, but I think that like having that type of card in the game is somewhat good because it does encourage running and encourages economy, but it's not good whenever everybody has it and everyone can have infinite credits all the time. So I think moving forward, like keeping in mind that putting low levels of influence on a card can really push that card over the edge of what is acceptable it's something to be mindful of. And Katara was a reflection of that. I think honestly Reign and Reverie has a bit of that as well, where influence is just a little higher than it's been in the past. And I think that's something that we'll continue to see going forward.
Yeah, I found it to be super cool because it means the decisions that you have to make about the most powerful cards you could include in your deck become that much harder because you're really squeezed. And crazy that really powerful, highly synergistic cards like Emergent Creativity showing up in Shaper decks, for example, is super cool. That Shaper players are saying, it's 5 influence, but it's that good for my deck. Let's try it. I think is really interesting for deck building going forward. So very cool.
In the past, 5 influence cards have always been relatively rare. I don't think they should be all that rare. I think it should be a pretty common thing to be like, oh, if I want this card, like I have to give up a lot of other options. We'll definitely see more of that going forward for sure.
I was gonna throw in a little jab. I also think some of the 5 influence cards before weren't good enough to be justified.
Well, honestly, influence, it's a little, honestly, it kind of sounds bad, but it is somewhat subjective. Like at the end of the day, influence comes down to how powerful the card is, but also simultaneously how much it represents that faction thematically.
I see. Right.
So what was it was an ice. It was a HB ice. Was it Wotan? Was that the 5 influence one?
Yeah.
That ice, nobody was ever going to play it out of HB anyways, probably. But there was a very thematic tie to HB with that ice. So Katara even reflects that a little bit. There are some cards that might have a pip higher of influence than they really need to for their power level, but it's one of those cards like it really works well in Shaper, doesn't make a lot of sense in Criminal, doesn't make a lot of sense in Anarch, so let's up its pip by 1. I think in the past a lot of the 5 influence cards that we saw were very heavily influenced by that. Cards overall now are less influenced by their thematic ties, but I think there needs to be a certain level of that to kind of keep things feeling like each faction has their own play style and whatnot.
And particularly the mini factions, like we've seen with Assimilator and Emergent and what was that new one? White Hat, all 5 influence. Like that is a statement that these effects are very representative of that particular mini faction. And
for sure.
Yeah, that's cool.
But I think that's though, right? To be able to give them powerful cards and keep them, and not just forcing those powerful cards someone to just come in and scoop it out. Like you actually have to like dedicate and play the actual faction that is in there. So it's I look at it as a balanced mechanic.
Oh yeah, it definitely helps with that for sure. I think for the mini factions or even factions that are a little underrepresented, like it helps push them back into the forefront. But also simultaneously, like it is a statement that these cards belong in these factions and that they're the ones that are supposed to be using them. If somebody else wants to, cool, but it's not really intended for anyone else.
I know you're pretty active in the community. You may not voice your opinion in certain message blogs and chats and Facebook posts and stuff like that, but we know that you keep your eyes open. Were you happy with the reaction for the new Most Wanted list changes?
Yeah, overall, definitely. I mean, there were some things I anticipated. I knew that some people were going to be very unhappy about rumor mill. That was a discussion that I had many times in playtesting. But yeah, I mean, I would say that pretty much everything that I anticipated, everything that I expected, worked out the way that I thought it would. And yeah, I was certainly happy with how everything kind of shook out.
Anything that you know, I think a lot of us really liked the fact that you gave a breakdown of your reasoning in an official article along the same times as that list came out. Is that something we can expect going forward?
Oh yeah, for sure. That was when we first changed the list from the pip adding system to the removed and restricted list. We had an article there, but it didn't go in depth as much as maybe it should have. I wrote my section of it and I tried to explain it, but then I talked to players afterwards, and it was pretty unanimous that people were like, "Oh, I wish you had told us a little bit more about these things." So going forward, that seems to be something that the community wants. Honestly, as I was writing this one, I realized that it was pretty fun to go in these explanations, and it's also kind of created a situation where I've gotten less questions about certain things. Before, after the first list came out, a lot of questions about why this card was on and why this card was on, and so now with this new list, that hasn't happened nearly as much, and it's kind of nice not to have to explain the same type of thing over and over. I'm happy to do that, but it's sort of nice to just kind of keep everything focused. So I think going forward, it's
that stole like 2,000 views from us. You didn't have to come and do an appearance.
Damn.
Yeah, I know. Right? No, I think it's nice to see that open dialogue on an official forum like that. So
Sure.
that was cool. Was there any kind of points that you wanted to clear up from reading people's comments after the fact about the Most Wanted list? Things that you didn't get to say kind of in that article that you might have saw people question?
I think Jameson's asking you to go in. He's saying, "Go in, Boggs. This is your time. Go in, attack him. Go." I'm okay.
not that I can think of. I mean, honestly,
the list said it all, or the explanation?
yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that the list said everything that I wanted to say. The article said everything I wanted to say. Anytime anything comes out like that, people are always going to have questions and stuff. But I can't think of anything that necessarily stood out to me as something that I should have necessarily explained more. If you guys know of anything, I'm open to listening to it, and I'm always happy to sort of refine that article process. But I think that honestly, rumor mill was probably the one that was the most controversial, and that was the one that I saw the most people talking about. But I mean, I don't really have anything to add other than what I said in the article. So yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with how everything came together there.
So the one thing that I'll ask you about the list is that I had the same problem when I felt Architect went on the list, and even not so much Eli, like that was fine, but I still didn't believe it needed to be. That I have with the Mother Goddess on the list.
Sure.
Is there what's the reasoning behind needing to stop or to put ice on this list? Because I feel like it's kind of counterintuitive to the game, where it's not introducing a mechanic or something that can't get around it, because if a certain ice is prevalent, there's always an icebreaker that can break it.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like it's just, taking away kind of little bits of surprises that the Corp has, and from creating scoring windows and stuff there, right? So it's like they put down a Mother Goddess, and now you're really forcing that runner to adjust and adapt their deck and being able to pull out what they need to get through that. right? I feel like there's every piece of ice has an answer. It's just the player has to choose to put that in their deck and be prepared for it. Maybe it's in there and they don't use it. Maybe it's in there and they do need it. So is there, a reason why you feel like ice needs to be most wanted listed?
I think it depends on the ice, of course. Like Fairchild 3, for example, went on there just because it's a pretty aggressive piece of ice. It's a relatively cheap piece of ice, like, concerning its like strength and the number of subroutines that it has. That one was mostly for efficiency. Mother Goddess was mostly really completely because of its combination with Loki. Having those two cards rezzed on two different servers, like you can pretty much lock a runner out who doesn't have an AI. And AI it's a weird breaker because you're right. Like the runners do have options for it, but most runners aren't throwing AI. Like whenever you're building a deck, you need a Fractor, that much. You need a Decoder, that much, and you need a killer. AI is sort of like, well, I could use a Makua, or maybe I could go Overmind in some cases, but most people don't include AIs unless they're like really building their deck around that concept. So with Mother Goddess specifically, like it was pretty easy to catch people completely off guard to the point where they really had no counterplay except just to hit the one server that wasn't protected, that nothing was rezzed on, which, is always a valid option. But there are certainly games where like you throw down a Loki in front of HQ, you throw down your Mother Goddess in front of whatever your scoring server is, and then the runner is just forced into R&D, and maybe they're just hitting ice and operations the whole time, so they can't really do much to affect anything that you're doing. Now, granted, there is counterplay in that you could do like an inside job or a spearfishing or something to that effect, but the reports that I was hearing was that it was just so prevalent to sort of lock a runner out who wasn't expecting anything like that, and there wasn't any sort of tangible, realistic way to ask the runner to try to get around it. So yeah, I mean, I think ice is sort of a case-by-case basis, because even highly efficient ice, there's almost always counterplay to it, but in this case specifically, it just seemed like it wasn't really a good situation to let stand. Granted, you can still do it, of course, because Mother Goddess is just restricted, so it obviously wasn't powerful enough that it needed to be removed entirely, but if somebody wants to do that with their deck, they just got to give up other stuff that they'd like to have.
Yeah, I just think it's weird when I did hear that kind of stuff, right? Like I read the forums and said that, this combination is so prevalent that it needs to be dealt with. And then I'm like, well, if everyone's doing it, then why aren't you prepared to face
Sure.
it?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, that's valid.
Yeah. So it was just wanted to get your opinion on that.
I think with that combination specifically, I wouldn't say that it was the most prevalent thing. I think there are definitely play styles and builds that are way more popular than that one, that are probably even worse than that one as far as like degeneracy is concerned. But it was one of those that, like, once it caught somebody off guard, basically that was the end of the game. Like, there's just not really anything you can do. And if we can catch those and kind of like limit those situations as much as possible, I think it's just better for everyone overall.
Okay, so basically just you're curbing bad play experience.
More or less, yeah. With in this case, yeah.
So actually, I have a follow up with that, because we're talking about ice. Throughout the game, it's always felt like ice subroutines can end up in a situation where they rarely fire.
Sure.
Right? And we're seeing a lot more. By the way, because I love this, we're seeing a lot more when encountered abilities that trigger. When encountered, this happens. Okay, now you deal with subroutines. Is this? And I mean, it sort of fixes the issue that I think I had a lot of discussion in the early part of the game, which was, does ice actually fire? Like, with the exception of it being the first turn where you run with no breaker and no way to get it, does ice ever actually fire and function outside the game? And up until recently, we were left with things like pop-up window, where it's like some very, very tiny effect that doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot. I mean, it's a swing a little bit, but it's interesting how that works. Mm-hmm. Is this the new trend in your design space for ice? Is this a more common thing we're going to be seeing, to make ice have more teeth, and basically never to prevent it from ending up in a scenario where ice doesn't fire. Ice doesn't do anything, but just simply have a credit tax, and that's it by itself.
If you don't mind, which ice are you speaking about? Any specific ice now? Like, are you talking about like Jua or something else?
Well, as an example, like Data Loop.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think like any sort of on-encounter effect, that's very much an NBN's color pie, and while I think that type of effect is important to have on ice, I wouldn't want to spread it around too much. I can't think of any other card off the top of my head. I guess there's the one in Jinteki, the
Anansi.
Yep.
Anansi, sure. There is that one. That one's after the encounter. And then there's also the one that lets you draw the card unless like the runner breaks it, and then they move to is it Archives, I believe? I'm blanking out. Is it Miraju or something?
Yeah, Miraju.
Yeah. So there's a couple of them outside of NBN, but I think for the most part, any sort of on-encounter thing needs to stay focused on them. However, I do agree that in the past, Ice has run into the situation where sometimes it's just sort of a blank card and like what it actually does. You have a strength value and you have a res cost, but the actual subroutines don't really matter all that much. Going forward, I would very much like for them to matter. I would like, when the runner hits a piece of ice, it's an actual decision on what they should break and how they should try to get through it. One of my favorite things that Damon did over his tenure was really push the power level of ice, and I think that's something that we can see going forward. But also too, like just exploring new options for what ice can do. I think Anansi is a really good example. Is something that I'm excited to do. So we might see more on encounter effects, we might not, but I think at the end of the day, like I do want ice to be more kind of important and sort of how they play out within the greater context of any given game.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I dig that answer. Okay.
It's been cool as well to see the reemergence of Next. By the way, just want to put that out there with Next Sapphire. Was it in this new pack here? It's cool. Keep that train going.
Yeah, a lot of people like Next. That's actually for the longest time when I used to play. I would only play Jinteki. Really, occasionally I would dip into Wayland, but whenever I would go HB, I would just do Next. I loved Next, so it's cool to be able to bring that back.
Nice.
Let's jump. Yeah, let's keep with the theme of talking about these new cards and stuff like that. You want to talk about RNG Key a little bit and the design space behind that one?
Sure, yeah.
Woo!
Other than just it helps people that are just coming into Atom.
Yeah. That card, that one changed a lot throughout playtesting, and I'm really happy with what we ended up on because I think it's a fun card that rewards skilled play, but at the same time, like if you combine it with a few other cards, like you can get a lot of value out of it. And I think the fact that it encourages run economy is very important. I don't want to say it's lacking, but I think that run economy is definitely less prevalent than it used to be. So I was a little I guess worried before RNG Key came out. I didn't know if its random nature would make people just look at it and be like, I don't want to play that. But I'm glad that the community has taken to it.
Do you feel like that sort of random element of it is characteristic of the game, or like has a place within the game? And like, because it's one thing that Damon mentioned many episodes ago when he came and talked about Revised Core, was how he wanted to take out effects like Accelerated Beta Test, which had this kind of top deck, you either win big or you lose big kind of element. Like, where do you think that kind of feeling has a place in the game?
I think it's definitely got a spot. I think you want to keep those effects limited, but with RNG Key specifically, it's kind of a controlled randomness. It's one of I know that people have like made up spreadsheets and stuff of the best number to pick, but also just like kind of assessing the deck that your opponent is playing and kind of looking at their archives, seeing what they've played estimating what's going to come up soon. That's a big part of it. So yeah, it's randomness for sure, and I think shying away from randomness is typically best in a game like Netrunner. But if there is some level of control, I think it kind of it creates this almost like a extra level of excitement that you don't always find on every card.
Yeah. Nice.
But it's got to be limited. It definitely has to be limited.
Yeah. Cool.
I was going to piggyback off that, but that answer kind of curved that question, where you see something like Hearthstone and these virtual card games, and they're really able to go more into playing randomness because they're able to do all these other controls and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of fun to see a card walk the line like that, so to speak, between like, I don't feel like it's going to be in every single deck. I don't think it's not going to show up, but I think those are the cards that make it exciting to watch. Like if you're watching a championship game and it's on stream and it comes down to something, or a couple RNG calls, I just think it just adds so much. Like, but it is a very, very razor line between something that could just be so incredibly random that it's stupid and overpowered, and so incredibly random that it's just never used.
Yeah, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I think with Netrunner specifically, it's already a game that deals with randomness a little more than other games do, just because you're trying to draw into your agendas. Sometimes you'll get agenda flooded, sometimes you will just be completely agenda dry and not be able to get the thing that you need. Sometimes you'll spend like 3 turns drawing, and then all of a sudden the runner will top deck the agenda that you wanted. So the fact that you're already balancing that randomness along with just all the other standard randomness from a card game, it's good to keep in mind that while these random effects are fun, they really have to be fine-tuned, and I'm happy with how RNG Key came out. I definitely think that I'm glad that you say it walks that line, because I totally agree. I think it landed right in the right spot.
Right, because we have seen things in the past, kind of, not let's not pull punches. It's not been able to pull it off properly with Push Your Luck. Like Push Your Luck. Right, like it's a card that was just there, and it's I mean, if used and if you were able to hit that, you're making a ton of money, but the gamble on that was just too ridiculous to pull off. So, I mean, now you have something like RNG Key that, that tunes that down a little more, and you're able to come up with a little bit more of like you said, with the spreadsheets and people overanalyzing and doing all that kind of stuff. That's probably fun to see, and I don't know if you actually did the homework on that, if you had the big spreadsheet and design process or not.
I started to, no, this is going to take too long. I just guess. I'm like 3, 5, that feels, I usually say 5, because I'm like, that's hedge fund, and if you haven't played all 3 of them, I'll hit it eventually. So.
Nice.
Can you talk about the design space that Wayland is going into? So there used to be something in Netrunner where every faction kind of had something that they couldn't do very well. Whether it was you looked at the runner side and you'd be like, okay, this faction is this is their awesome breaker, and then they have like something that they can't do. And then on the corpse side of things, you had someone, like say Wayland they were really good at walls and barriers, and they were, not so good on some of the other pieces. So they all had their strengths and weaknesses, and mechanics kind of were separate. But in the past, traditionally, Wayland hasn't been able to say tag, but now we're seeing different tagging abilities show up within Wayland, and you don't have to import NBN tagging to do that. So can you talk about the headspace that Wayland is kind of coming into?
Sure, yeah. Wayland it's always kind of relied on tags, but there's never been a very reliable way, like you said, within faction to do it. So, like with Katara specifically, we sort of wanted to move in a direction that try to land tags on the runner a little bit of a different way than maybe NBN would. NBN obviously has their traps and stuff that'll do it, their ice. But at the end of the day, like if NBN wants to tag you, they'll just hit you with an operation that'll do it. I think Wayland, on the other hand, like they should be able to land some tags. I think it's always kind of been unfortunate that they had to import certain cards because not all the factions had to do that. And so like now their tagging options are sort of in the same vein as like something you might find on Prisec or you know, something like that, where it takes a little bit of work for Wayland to set up, but if the runner hits it, then it's sort of an inevitability that they're going to get tagged. It's a design space that I'm hoping kind of fleshes out and gives Wayland a bit more teeth, because I think they could certainly use it.
Yeah, it's always been interesting because they've relied on tagging so heavily, but they've never been able to actually pull it off.
Yeah, all their tagging in the past, I think, was pretty much on their ice. There was I can't even remember the name. It was like a core set piece of ice, but it would give some tags, and there was always like little things here and there. But I think that's one of the reasons that Wayland's never really been on top for a long time, is because like if they want to be aggressive, like they have to spend a lot of influence on things that other factions don't really have to worry about. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully these new tagging options help them out.
By the way, major props for the card that was previewed in the final pack of the cycle, False Flag. The flavor on that card is excellent. The art, the play style, you're advancing. It's like, is it a takeover? Is it not? And the dude in the art's like, it's a takeover. It's great. And that can, you know, if the runner hits that at the wrong time, get them totally swamped in tags, which is super cool. Yeah.
I don't know if it'll ever make its way into the meta, but there was a little bit of a hope there that Government Takeover would see some love going forward. And having a card like this in the meta, I think, is important for a card like Government Takeover to exist. I could be wrong, but I believe this is the first Wayland trap card, really. You had the Space Camp one, which put an advancement counter on token, but I think this one's like an advanceable trap.
Yeah.
And so, like, it was fun creating that. It's a space that I wouldn't want to push Wayland in too much. Like, I could see another card, maybe another 2 cards, sort of coming into this space for them. But Wayland is very much about like, you see what I'm doing, but I don't care because I'm just going to do it. What are you going to do about it? But this card just it fits so well with the whole theme that I feel like it would. It'd be terrible if we didn't explore that space in this card. So I'm glad you like it.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, between False Flag and we've also seen Gene Splicer, these ambushes that also can become agendas? I think that's super fascinating from a mechanical standpoint. It's like, and on the runner side, it's like do or don't. Either I hit it and I deny the points, or I don't, and they can get a nice little point spread there. Like, how was that evolution of the ambush mechanic to G-Splicer and False Flag?
That honestly came from 2 different things. The first one, and most important one, is that I love Jinteki, Personal Evolution specifically, and there are so many times I'll install Advance a Junebug, the runner looks at it, doesn't do anything, and then I'm just like, okay, well, I wasted a whole turn to not do anything. So as a player, I always wanted to have the option of sort of like an out. It's not a very efficient out, but it does allow me to sort of turn my poor play into something that pushes me forward in the game. Simultaneously, both of these cards, False Flag and Gene Splicer, they help sort of combat that the runner that just sits there and just sits there and takes 4 credits or 8 credits if they have a magnum opus every turn. So like if you can install advance in a server and you can force them to run that server enough, there will be a certain point where you will open a scoring window, and being able to like sort of put the runner in that situation without actually giving up any points yourself, I think is very, very important. So NGO kind of came from the same type of thing. There were all these cards that were intended to combat a very kind of boring runner that wasn't going to run. It was just going to sit there and gain a bunch of credits. But at the same time, it was they're intended to sort of like make any sort of play that you might sort of mess up on, make it redeemable, allow you to get something out of it.
Yeah, that's the first thing that I thought about when I went to the NGO side of things. Mm-hmm. Right, like from my experience with Jinteki, just being like, oh, I'm going to put this card down, bluff out some advancements on it, and if the guy's like, I'm just going to draw and take some credits, I'm like, oh, crap. Right? Because the longer that card sits there on the table, then the longer they know that you're not doing anything with it. So these assets or ambushes and stuff with built-in, recovery from that, it's like I don't feel as bad putting something out there, dropping some advancements on it, because I'm at least getting a return on investment somehow. It may not be, for the people that sit there and actually do the click math and what is a click worth and how much is an advancement worth and what is this, what could I have done? It may not be 100% or say, 110% return on investment, but man, it's better than a card lying face down with advancement counters on it for the rest of the game, so.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it also just plays into the whole mind game element. I was playing a game, I want to say last week. My friend was playing PE. He was like down to 1 credit, I think. And so I went to run on HQ. He rezzed this, the NGO that he had sitting there from literally the beginning of the game. I thought it was a Project June bug or something, or a Cerebro overrider. Rezzed that. Rezzed his DNA tracker, and I just face planted into it because it was like he doesn't have the credits to res anything. So like having that as an option is really cool. And I don't know if PE will ever be dominant in the meta. I don't know if I'd necessarily want it to be as much as I love it. It's not a playstyle that a lot of people like playing against, but I like that it now has some extra teeth, and all of those sort of horizontal ambushy type decks do now.
Because we're in the space of Wayland, I have a sort of rude question. I'm gonna send this question to you, Boggs, but I also kind of hope the chat chimes in with their opinion as well, because I like hearing people's answers to this, because Wayland has been, I think, a problem child of the game, more so compared to any other faction in the game. I think just in general, the history of Wayland, how it was incredibly dominant with no answer at the core set, and then after that we saw this uniqueness where Wayland was doing okay, and then it was pretty clear that 1 or 2 cards they didn't have that secondary win strategy, and they didn't have the available tools to win like other corporations. So we've had, because we built it, we've had Builder of Nations, and we've had Spoiled, the outfit, as well as SSO Industries. I'm asking you, Boggs, do you think third time's a charm or second time's a charm? Do you think you cracked the code? Do you think these IDs and the cards that support them will make Wayland great again?
Yes.
You're confident about that?
I'm pretty confident.
Nice.
I'm some of the upcoming cards I think are really going to push Wayland quite ahead from where they are now. So, and where they've been in the past. So yeah, I think it's going to be exciting to see, but I definitely think we can expect to see some pretty powerful Wayland stuff here soon.
And I love that you're messing with. It's more of a nod to us. I think it's very selfish, but I love that you're making an effort again for bad publicity, right? Like I
couldn't help myself.
Yeah, it's so. I mean, what I would have suggested though, next time on when the next time you just make one of these cards, just put our faces on it and then have it be bad publicity themed, and it basically, the check writes itself.
I just want to be buried in the flavor text somewhere.
Now, I'll just get your guys' face engraved on the side of the building of the art.
Yeah.
It'll just be much more, but with the 3 of you.
Just it writes itself.
It's just bad publicity ink.
Yeah. It's good to know that that is a mechanic that you guys haven't forgotten about or left alone. I don't expect you to leave any mechanics of the game alone per se, but it just felt like we were moving to the spot where bad publicity was so atrociously bad as far as what you were getting for the trade-off, that you never really wanted to use it. It was like you would maybe, if you were great, you would only generate bad publicity as early as possible to get a quick scoring advantage or something like that. And then after that, it was completely horrific. And now we're seeing, I'm horrible at card names, but the one that was recently spoiled that said, gain a bad publicity and gain 10.
Too big to fail.
Yeah. Is it gain 7?
It's I actually have it right here. Play only if you have fewer than 10 credits, gain 7 credits, and take 1 bad publicity.
Right, and that's on top. And then, of course, you factor in the ability provided for the outfit.
Family owned and operated.
Yeah, it's like what is happening? Like 10 credits. If I have 2 credits, I now just one click. I'll take a bad pub, and I'll have 12 credits. That's an insane jump for the corporation. I love it.
Oh yeah, for sure. It was like that whole concept, bad publicity. It was so interesting to explore because it's a mechanic that in some ways needs to be bad for the corp. Like the corp should not want to get a bad publicity. They should take it and be like, well, now the runner is never going to stop running. But at the same time, I totally agree. In the past, I think we were a little too conservative with what we thought bad publicity was worth. So. Yeah, I'm hoping that these new cards, and I think they will, but I'm really hoping that they'll kind of bring about like a new play style for Wayland, because it was fun to work on, and I think it'd be fun to see if that becomes a thing in the meta. So I'm glad that you like Too Big to Fail. That's encouraging.
I love it. I really do like that card.
Is it opening up because it's in a safer play space now that, say, that second cycle is kind of rotated out?
Sure, yeah, a little bit. I mean, that cycle had so many bad pub cards. It also had, was it Blackmail? I believe was in there as well. So, I think bad publicity is now one of those mechanics that we can play with a little bit more, because a lot of the old cards that played with it, kind of, they're gone now. They're not something that we have to worry about too much. So it just opened up a lot of design space when those rotated out.
Nice.
Yeah, I think everyone should either be playing Jemison and then rotating off to the outfit when it's released. So that's my hidden tip for those people that made it to this mark of the cast.
Nice.
Hollis, you have anything else to throw in there?
No, I don't. I'm just really I like the design.
I was hoping you could talk a sec about this new DJ Fenris dude.
Yeah, that's where I was to gone next too.
There you go. He's been getting a lot of interest. I think, like when Rebirth came out, people's just their minds exploded. It's like, oh my god, what do I do with this card? It's just one influence, so you can put it in so many decks and have so many options. What was that like, putting that together and looking at these subtypes and picking Gmod and being like, all right, here are the Gmods. What could we do? How is this going to shake out? Like, what do you expect for this card when it enters the game?
Especially since we've never seen a subtype on a rudder matter before. Like, it was always just thematic, right?
Yeah. Like DJ Fenris actually came about from it was a conversation with one of my playtesters. And we were just talking about just different cool things that we could do, some limit 1 per deck things. And it was when this idea was first presented, I was like, that's really exciting. That would like create a lot of really cool situations. So it didn't necessarily surprise me that so many people were kind of surprised by this card, because I was almost giddy in testing and stuff. The Gmod thing came from it's partially thematic. DJ Fenris is a Gmod himself, but it mostly came from the fact that like the effects that were found on Gmods, I felt across the board sort of offered varying play styles, things that you could pull into your deck that you normally wouldn't have, but also they're relatively limited compared to like I think if you look up naturals, there's actually a lot of naturals. There's like 20 something or 30 something naturals, maybe not quite that high, but there's quite a few of them. So I felt the effects should be limited to just a small section of runners. After comparing all the different types of runners, Gmod seemed like the way to go, and then it was also just thematically fitting. Sorry, there was another question in there, and what was your question, Jameson?
No, I just said it's interesting because we've never seen the subtype of runners matter before.
Oh yeah. That was actually really exciting to explore, and that's something that I would like to do more of because it wasn't it was something that just sort of came about with DJ Fenris because it just made a lot of sense, but and it wasn't really a mechanic that I had necessarily considered before. It's like I think all of the subtypes on runners, they're fun to put on there, they're thematically tying, but I never really thought twice about them until I was working on him. So it's something I would really like to explore more in the future.
Word.
What about sticking with runners there for a second and saying moving a corp mechanic into a runner ID?
Well, I mean that would be heresy. I don't think we could do anything like that.
That would be a head case.
That would be a head case. Yeah, that would. I don't think that.
So where did this idea stem from?
Oh, Kiko. She I had a blast creating her. She was when we first came up with the identity itself, this escaped clone that was running around in Shiloh, automatically I'm like, well, she's a Jinteki clone, like she has to do something Jinteki, and this identity, like the ability just sort of fell into place. It just kind of worked from the get-go. I'm glad that people were really excited for it because I'm very, very excited for her. She might be one of my favorite characters in all of the Netrunner universe. Like, she's just really, really cool. So her backstory is awesome. Everything about her is just really cool.
Was it strange to come up with the actual wording on the card? Because it's not like play a Psy game or something, right? Like, you're actually saying you and the corp secretly spend the credits, right? And I think, Alec, like I said before, I forgot that name again. Like, there are cards that trigger off when it says when you and the corp secretly spend, right? So was there reasoning behind like those chosen verbiage then?
Honestly, her wording was pulled almost verbatim from Caprice. Like, they're sisters, so it just made sense. But I looked at Caprice and obviously other Psy cards for inspiration and how to word it. But I don't know if the wording changed at all throughout the entirety of her development. I think she basically just landed on this from the get-go, which doesn't happen a lot. Most cards go through a couple iterations. So I was very happy with just how she fell together. So yeah, like the wording just I wrote it down. It just seemed to make sense, and all of my playtesters got it. So yeah, she pretty much just stayed the same from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Sisters.
Up to Hollis.
Confirmed.
Hollis, anything?
Off the top of my head, I don't. Honestly, I know I don't ever say this, but I am.
Is anything coming from anything coming from the chat that you've made note of?
Oh well, so someone did ask. So, and I guess I'll elaborate a little bit. There's some worry, of course, because so far Krim is missing a little love. And earlier, when we were starting the discussion, they thrown out the question, are we going to see more Krim love? Like, I think the answer is obviously yes. But so instead of asking that question, it's always hard to ask this question because I'm like, he's either going to say yes, no, or maybe. Instead of asking that question, let me ask you this: what, from the current standpoint, as you see Criminal, what do you think would give them some more love? Like, what do you think they may need at this point? How do you see it as on the design side?
From this point, I think that pushing Criminal back in the direction of run-based economy is important. That was one of the things that originally drew me to them. That was why I always loved them when I was a player. And I think kind of showing them a little more love there would be important. I also think that like just having general good card effects that stay in their faction is pretty important as well. Criminal has sort of suffered in the past from having some really cool effects that had some pretty low influence. So I think just sort of like ensuring that if somebody else wants to take one of their tools, they have to really pay for it. I think that's important. I think just in general, sort of pushing Criminal's economy a little bit, making sure that they are making consistent runs every turn, and making sure that their stuff stays in faction. That's probably the most important things to do for them at this point in time.
Oh, and actually, that question allows me to piggyback off another one that also came in chat. All right, so here's more explanation. When we were discussing rotation, as it was coming, as it was happening, we knew that Siphon was going to be bye-bye. So I guess right now, whenever I've discussed Siphon more recently, it's been the topic of discussion seems to be when Siphon was first, crafted, there weren't these amazingly efficient common reasons to include tag prevention and removal. But of course, as the game has gone on, tag prevention and tag removal just got easier. It became a very, very easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So you remove the negative side effect of using a card like Account Siphon. Do you think that the game has changed now to where Account Siphon is a bit safer to use now, or do you still think the negative play experience associated with it is still too great to keep it in, or to ever consider putting it back?
I think the biggest thing with Account Siphon, being able to sort of avoid those tags, get rid of them, work around them, that was always problematic. But even floating the tags, I think to a certain extent was problematic. And the fact that Account Siphon, it drained the corp while also simultaneously putting you in a position where you could probably hit any server you wanted to again. That was, to me, that always seemed to be the most problematic thing. Like you really push the corp's economy back, but then you don't necessarily sacrifice anything in the process except for those tags. But like you said, like they're not really hard to play around or to get rid of. So I mean, I think corp economy has definitely the strength of the corp's economy overall has grown in the last few years. I think corp economy is probably stronger than it's ever been, and I could see a situation where a card like Siphon could be very valuable to criminal, but I think it would have to be controlled compared to what it has been in the past.
Has designing viruses been made a little easier now that Noise has rotated out? Like, we're seeing a lot of work done with viruses and that mechanic come through this cycle.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, the fact that Noise is gone, that sort of opens up a whole world of possibilities. I know that I actually talked with Lucas a long time ago about that. It was last year sometime, and he was telling me that there were ideas that he had that he just couldn't really flesh out because Noise was such a dominant force that you had to always keep in mind. So the fact that Noise is gone, I mean, that really, I think there's a lot of really interesting and crazy things that we can do with viruses now that we never had the opportunity for before.
Nice.
Alex?
Yeah, I hope you like viruses because Katara has viruses.
Here they come.
Mm-hmm.
The West Nile, because I mean it's set in. Okay, well.
Oh man, I missed opportunities. Shouldn't even I probably shouldn't have actually. That would have been.
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't name a card that. Never mind.
Yeah.
idea.
Probably not.
That would have been changed. Like somebody.
I like
Michael.
It's one of those situations where if you had done it, it's like a problem. But if I make the joke, it all of a sudden isn't. Isn't that crazy? No.
Got there.
Sorry, I'm not shy about.
Do you have any thoughts? We haven't really had a chance to divulge into it too much, but this new NBN ID that is coming. Some people might have picked up the pack, some people might not have it yet. But they're saying when the turn ends, you name a card type. Is this something that we're seeing reoccurring happening within NBN now? Is naming cards to gain money? And how did this Asmiri EdTech
Asmari EdTech, yeah.
How did it shape up?
Yeah, that one. So, not Gentech. NBN's mechanical focus for Katara is playing into that kind of the bouncing effects that they've had in the past, Archangel is a good one to look at. Now we've got cards like Jua, which bounce things, but then also simultaneously says, hey, you can't reinstall that this turn. There's some other cards that I think there was one in the first pack called Self-Growth Program. If the runner is tagged, you get to bounce 2 cards. So a lot of those effects, they came about to push NBN in sort of a new and different direction that they hadn't really explored before. But having an identity that could sort of play into all of that and say, hey, I'm getting rid of your stuff, but I'm also accelerating my economy at the same time. If I guess correctly, if I sort of play my cards right and understand what you want to do. That's sort of where Asmari's creation came about.
Is that to take them in a drastic direction away from what they used to be as this fast advance faction? Is it kind of to slow the pace of NBN then?
Yes and no. It's. I think on some levels, like NBN, that is part of NBN's identity, having the ability to fast advance. But I think that fast advance overall is not super healthy for the game. It needs to be there. It needs to be an option, but it shouldn't be as prevalent as it was years ago. So NBN, they kind of are in the same boat as Criminal. They were propped up by a few key cards, and when those cards left the game, they both suffered pretty tremendously. I think NBN is like, they've got CTM, so they're still kind of okay there, but most of their other identities they just kind of crumbled there for a long time. So I wanted to create a situation where if we are ever put in that position again where some cards had to maybe rotate out or go away, that the faction wasn't just going to completely fall apart because it wasn't only relying on these cards to actually operate. And I think like going forward, having each faction branch out a little bit more and have a couple more play styles that are viable, I think that's important for the factions themselves because it helps give them stability. But it's also simultaneously important for players because maybe you have a favorite faction, but now you've got different ways to play that faction, and it just makes things a little more exciting during deck building and whatnot.
Is that the same way that the 419 is going to bring to Criminal? Just a whole different play style than what we've seen?
Yeah, completely. Like 419 was very much the same type of focus. Let's take something that Criminal has always kind of hinted at or always kind of done, but now let's like really expand upon that.
Right, and then along the same lines is that if certain cards are removed from the game, a whole archetype is not destroyed, or a whole faction is not House of Cards on a couple staples, right?
Exactly. Yeah. To just ensure that if one play style isn't necessarily viable, other play styles most likely are.
Do you get nervous taking a mechanic like Expose and then taking another risk on it, as it hasn't traditionally in the past worked out? And we can say the same with Bad Publicity, right? Like, is there are you guys just going to approach these two mechanics as I'm going to clean the slate and learn from things, or are you hoping that you're bringing enough to the table to get people to trust in them again?
Yeah, I think that like with those mechanics that didn't quite pan out in the past, I don't think they didn't pan out because they were mechanics that weren't exploring. I think they just didn't pan out because either we were too conservative with them, or we just didn't necessarily offer effects that were competitive with other effects that people could play with.
Yeah.
Something with Expose is it's kind of interesting that if it's too powerful and it's too easy to do, it removes sort of the whole point of Netrunner. Like the core of Netrunner is I put something down as the corp and you don't know what it is. Being able to expose that is a lot of fun, and I think like being able to sort of control that information is important for the runner, but there also has to be a certain level of like misinformation. So I understand why the Expose effects were maybe a little more conservative in the past, but I think going forward, it's a mechanic that I would like to explore, specifically in Criminal. I wouldn't want to see it everywhere, And I think that Criminal could probably turn it into like a useful mechanic without completely like dominating everything with it.
Yeah, and by when I say underutilized and stuff like that, I just mean from a competitive perspective.
Sure, yeah.
Like, to me, Expose always felt like the learner's mechanic, right? Like, when it was out the box, I really feel like people are going to gravitate towards Criminal and Jinteki, and it was the way to... Jinteki was going to do traps, and it was the way not for a new player to be burned so oftenly, right? To have that a scapegoat outing.
I would agree with that. I think to a certain level, it is definitely a beginner mechanic. But at the same time, like I'm hoping that going forward, maybe some of those cards like False Flag or I'm blanking on the name, the one that gives you money, the trap that gives you money, the new one, NGO Front. That one, yeah, that one. I'm hoping that cards like that can totally devastate the runner if they run on them at the wrong time or just run on them at all. I would like to see Expose make its way into the meta a little bit, even among experienced players, because it's a card type that has never really had any sort of prevalence at all within the meta, but I think it's definitely got a place there for sure.
Speaking of getting into the meta, have there been cards from these first 3 packs of the Katara cycle that you've been surprised have been kind of as explored or as popular as they have been, that maybe you thought, well, maybe some people will try this, but have actually kind of been really more impactful than you expected?
Yeah. A big one was actually RNG Key. That was one of those. I was like, it's fun, it's interesting. I'm pretty sure that Adam will use it, but I didn't know if it would be used much beyond him. It wasn't necessarily intended as an Adam card, but I knew it'd be good in him. I figured anyone else who used it would just, want some. I'd say it's kind of just a fun mini game to play. But people really took to that one really, really fast. The Ikawa project, is it Ikawa Protocol? Ikawa project, that was one of those during playtesting I was kind of on the fence about. I'm like, I don't think it's too strong. Maybe I should make it a little stronger. Maybe it should be 3 credits instead of 2. I left it at 3 because I didn't want another NAPD contract situation where it had to go on any sort of list. And also there were plenty of games too where I would hit it and I'm just like, I can't steal that. I got 1 credit. So it felt like it was in a good place, but I wasn't quite sure. It's been nice to see that one around. I think those are the only ones that I can really think of off the top of my head right now. But RNG Key specifically was I was really happy to see that people took to that one, because I really didn't know if anyone would.
Going into new cards and new territories after this reset, do we feel like we're going to maybe see some love for some of forgotten runners, or corporations of the past? I feel, when I think Expose effects and things like that, I think I really do think Silhouette, from her style from back in the day, but we're also, like, we didn't really see Los really make a big push, and I know I joked before, but I don't know if Waylon's style is fully flushed out to do a Jemison build. Let's talk from a competitive perspective on that one, as I really feel like it needed to be. I feel like now that I'm talking more and more about this, it's probably going to be a we'll see answer or something like that.
That is the answer that I was going to give.
Yeah. Okay. We might as well.
It's something that I'm mindful of. I know that there are a lot of identities that have never quite been fleshed out that I would like to see more fleshed out. Ian Sterling is a weird example, but I've always loved him. He's not very good, but I would like for him to be much better than he is. Also, the Professor, I know that he's one that a lot of people really like. He's never necessarily been my cup of tea, but I have a lot of friends who love the Professor, but the Professor's really, really hard to use. Exile's another one.
Yeah, and it's this theme, right, of all these runners from big boxes that will never cycle,
Yeah.
and they're kind of sticking around, but like sometimes they just don't seem to be as prevalent or in the forefront of people's minds as from what the card pool is trying to do, because usually the cards of a cycle will support the new mechanic of the runner that gets added in.
Oh yeah, definitely, and I think like that's always going to be the case, but keeping in mind these underrepresented runners is really important, or keeping in mind the underrepresented corporations is very important. It's difficult to sort of create cards that everyone can kind of use equally, or to create cards that just sort of target a specific faction or even archetype and say, or not faction, identity or archetype, and say like, this is absolutely going to help you and only you. But I think it's something that I'd like to try going forward.
That question was asked to transition to this question. So there's a method
Whoa.
to this. Yeah.
Segway!
So sometimes these runners get forgotten because of a design tweak on the card. You mentioned Ian Sterling. I played a hell of a lot of Ian Sterling back in the day, but I really felt it was handicapped being at 45-10. I loved Kit when she came out, but that card was handicapped again. And I'm, as much as I love the ability on, the new Shaper Nisei, I'm seeing a 45-12. So is there concern, or what's the, are you able to talk about the reasoning of lowering that to a 12 instead of just keeping it at the 15? Like, are you worried about that one kind of getting maybe left behind?
Not necessarily. She was 45-15 for a long time, and she had 0 link. But as we got later in development, it was decided that it would be nice to have another shaper that has a link. Now, adding the link on top of her already really powerful ability and all that influence was a little too much. I thought the ability fit thematically and it worked really well mechanically, so I didn't want to tweak that. Influence seemed like the way to go. But I agree that 10 influence in the past has been like almost way too crippling, and I didn't necessarily want to bring back that situation again because I think she is such an exciting character. 12 seemed like the right range. In testing, it worked out really well. It limits her a little bit, but not nearly as much as some of those other runners. Having that link really helps set her up with certain builds and whatnot. And also her ability is just so strong and so consistently good that I think that the 12 influence isn't really going to make a dent in the number of people who are going to play her.
Is that something that scares you off to do, though, Michael? Is play with those stats on an ID, because it can be so, live and let die for something like that?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, influence is that one's a little bit tricky. I mean, in the past we've seen cards that have had 17 influence that maybe didn't need it, like Near Earth Hub is one of those cards. I'm sure during testing, like, it seemed like a card that wasn't quite powerful enough, so you bump up its influence, but then when it comes out, everybody's like, oh, this ability is actually great, and I have all this influence, why wouldn't I choose this card to play? So it's really, really tricky to play around with, but I think that if you can get it to the point where it feels right, then it's absolutely worth doing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, or do you think that we're just spoiled with having 15 or something? Like if the game had have been 45-12 or 45-10 from the beginning, and you were only able to pick those select few influence cards, and we've seen cards in the past like either been over-influenced or under-influenced, and through the life cycle of the game, that has kind of balanced out, where we're seeing, you mentioned at the beginning, we're seeing maybe one extra pip on there to keep things in faction and to keep things balanced. The special cards that are now in the mini factions, 5 influence to hold their value there. Do you think that that's maybe something that we're just spoiled with, being at 15, being able to take as much as we could, and 12 shouldn't be a problem, and maybe we can expect maybe a whole more slew of 12, down the road because of the way that you're influencing and balancing the other cards out.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that 15, it's become the expectation, and given that so many powerful cards have not had very high influence on them, it's created one of those situations where like giving up just a couple pips of influence on my identity can really change the consistency and the quality of my deck. Moving forward, by raising the pips of influence that are found on the cards themselves now, I'm hoping that it will sort of help to close that gap. Now, the difference between 12 influence and 15 influence might be one card, maybe two cards, but it's not going to like absolutely change your deck as much as it could have in the past. Or even the jump from like 15 to 10, I would be pretty hesitant to explore an identity that only has 10 influence. I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it, but it's just one of those things that it really makes everything for the identity so tight, and like it has to be a truly powerful ability in order to sort of make 10 an actual viable option. But if we go forward and move into a situation where influence pips are a little bit higher across the board, then I think like playing around with those identity influence levels, it's going to be a little bit easier to do. It's not going to be nearly as swingy as it has been in the past, because it'll end up being the difference between one, maybe two cards.
Hollis, Alec, do you guys have anything else?
No.
Well, speaking of the past, I wanted to just get your quick thoughts on how it feels like we've been living in a post-Jackson Howard world for the past several months. And honestly, I really haven't heard anybody complain about it. I haven't heard anybody say anything. Maybe a little grumble here and there. Maybe they get a little agenda flooded at one game in 20. But yeah, I think it's been pretty remarkable how people were so distraught that Jackson was going to be leaving the game and what would we do? And I don't know. From your perspective, have you felt that things have worked out fine?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that Damon was right. Like Jackson, I think he was great for what he did when he first came out. He helped you combat noise. He really helped get around any sort of agenda flood problems for newer players. But to a certain extent, he was sort of a product of the time that he was created in. And as we moved forward into the game's life, and people kind of started to understand how to play around those situations, or even, they were offered other cards, such as like preemptive action and whatnot, I think that it's created a situation where like Jackson really was kind of a crutch. He was a very easy crutch to lean on. There was good reason for people to play him, but now that he's gone, I don't think it's really affected much of anything.
The real people rotated him long ago.
The real players played anonymous tip, and you drew your agendas and you scored them.
Yeah,
that's what you did.
I'd also like to just throw in, as I pat you on the back even more, Boggs, but I really also feel like a lot of the design decisions for some cards, we talked about it earlier, the 5/3 agendas, and the fact that they've been designed to give you something, whether they are scored or stolen, also plays into, okay, so your agenda flooded, yes, but wait. If there's a slight advantage to have an agenda stolen. So much so to where, we saw that during Sword Champ season, there was a Jinteki deck, and I don't know how good the deck is in the entire meta, but we saw a Jinteki deck that won for one of their Sword Champs with all 5/3s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all engineering, one SSL endorsement, and Obokata, and that was their unique card. And you look at those and you're like, wow, that's insane. Like, it's all 5/3s. Agenda density is very, very low, and for the runner to take any of these agendas, it's either giving you something, or it's hurting them so badly it's hoping you for that secondary win condition. Because those conditions exist in the game now, that only goes to further show, a card like Jackson just isn't as necessary as it was at that time. So props. Thanks for even making it. Damon said it first, and then you're like, don't worry, bro, I got your back. And then you design your card to reinforce it. So thanks.
It's teamwork. It's teamwork.
Yeah.
Is there Is there a card right now? Like, I know you're able to do a lot more with problem cards because of the MWL, but is there a card right now that is kind of like the bane of your existence too, because it's in the pool? It's really limiting. I use the example of Damon has talked before about even though self-modifying code is such a great card, and it is everything that is Shaper thematically, of being able to just turn stuff into other stuff and go and be on the run and rig build and things like that. But he's always said about how the problems that card has created for him and the game. Is there something?
Sure,
is there
yeah.
something that sticks out in your mind, or is most of the stuff kind of like been dealt with now?
I see where Damon's coming from with SMC. I have run into similar problems in the past with that card. I think more than anything for me, it's probably hard-hitting news. It's such a powerful tagging option if the runner's not really worrying about it, or if they're not necessarily expecting it. It can close out a game if you really want it to. And creating a card that actually competes with hard-hitting news without like just being absurdly powerful and sort of the clear replacement for hard-hitting news. It's that one's been a challenge. I think that hard-hitting news has a place in the Netrunner card pool. Same with SMC. Like I understand why they're created, and I think that players tend to gravitate towards those cards because they're powerful, but also because they are somewhat fan favorites. But at the same time, like, yeah, they're both of those are really limiting, especially hard-hitting news for me.
Cool. Alec, do you have any follow-ups?
I hit all the things I was curious about. So yeah, I'm good. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think that taps me out. Hollis, anything from the chat or?
So I think that the majority of the questions I know won't just simply be yes, no, maybe. I've tried to focus on and ask. It's hard because looking at the chat and actively listening to the discussion.
Sure, yeah.
It's a constant back and forth. I wanted to say in general that locally, this is sort of a small rule talk. This isn't like going to be a lengthy one, but I will say this. And I've said it before on previous episodes, but locally, I know that at some point, but right before rotation, a little bit before rotation, I think my local meta just kind of tapped out of Netrunner. We just couldn't. It was one of the most fun games we had all collectively played as a group, but it got to this point where while the game was diverse, there was something about the existing game, pre-rotation, where we just weren't having as much fun as we would have liked. The fun just started to fade. And after seeing the cards coming out of Qatar, and actually I have someone online, I speak with him, CJ Hines. When I posted we're going live, he even said, hey, I haven't played for 2 years, but every card that I've seen out of this cycle and with the way the decks and the metas change for post-rotation has just reinvigorated me into playing the game. And while I don't have a lot of players locally that jumped back in at all, it's at least on the table to discuss again, where we're all like, you know what, I really miss this game, and it's looking really, really good, and I think we want to get a game or two in. And I have a friend named Ricky, and Rick and I, sparred a little bit, and I was just like, I was the first time ever actually playing Adam, and I was going, I can't believe that I'm actually playing this. This is ridiculous. Like, this is just so ridiculous.
I can't believe we talk every week and you don't listen to my advice.
He's been saying it for years.
I'm just like, what is this? But it's really great. It's great to jump back in the game and of course realize how bad I am, but also realize that there's all these options that are fresh and new, and the meta's been shaken up decently enough to where there's still fun options, even if they're not the most competitive. And I felt like previously we were looking at an environment that was so. I don't even know if this is even correct to say, but it felt so catered to competitive players because I felt like competitive players, like you mentioned earlier, are just going to pick whatever's best anyway. There's no brand loyalty for players that are at the highest level. They don't care really about the color pie and their personal like tilt towards it. If they think it's the best deck, they're gonna play the best deck. And I feel like now there's so many more new and different options. I'm a person that very much wants to only play the competitive thing, and I am for sure looking at like maybe I should play Adam. maybe I should try some weird stuff that I have never tried just because this is interesting. This is fun. So
that's good to hear. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Thank you. You guys did it, Boggs. Thanks.
Yay!
I think the question that is on most people's minds, I've seen it pop here and there in the chat, is about the release schedules for Most Wanted list. Are we able to see that happening more regularly than it has? I know that we've kind of like when people were expecting ones, or when you always know when it's been a while between Most Wanted lists, when all of a sudden like the Facebook groups start calling for one right before major tournaments and things like that. Like
Sure.
Do you think we'll ever see a system where say it will go like there'll be one dropping before a store championships, or dropping before a nationals, or before worlds, and that will just be on regular, like say like certain times, or whether it is just that and I know there's probably a lot that you want to do but is tied by what you can do and the whole get it out the door process, but times when saying like, hey, there are no updates to the Most Wanted list, even though if I it's the Most Wanted list time of the month, and I'll just say that there's no changes. All right, like
sure.
So
I mean that's something we've we like pretty much since I started at FFG. That's something we've talked about, and it's something that we're always sort of working on and working towards. I know in the past that I've said that I really want to get the MWLs out every 3 to 4 months, and that's always a goal. Sometimes it takes longer than that, just for X reason or Y reason or whatever it ends up being. But we definitely are always working towards a system that is, as cohesive as it can be and as regular as it can be, because that's something that fans want. It's also something that we want to. So we're always striving to get to that point.
Yeah, because even Paul just mentioned it in chat right now. Because we did see like even FFG organized play, they made a post at the start of the month saying, Star Wars Destiny wasn't getting an update this month. So it was it was nice just to know, okay, that you guys have looked at the pool, you've addressed it, but it's no update is needed or required, right? So that was refreshing, and I think there's been that cry out to kind of level set that across the board.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's definitely something to keep in mind, especially if people are really wanting it, for sure.
Hollis, did we have any other cryouts there in chat, or do we let the man free?
I think we let him free. This is the last question. I like the last question.
The last one, Hollis.
It is the last one. I promise. Your fans want to know, where is your hat?
Oh man, it's timeout.
Apparently, you're not real Boggs if you don't have a hat or a beanie or something.
I'm the Boggs imposter. There you go.
There it is.
The
official.
Right.
No.
We are not worthy.
The real one. The Boggs father has spoken.
I was gonna wear it, but it started to warm up in Minneapolis. I say started to warm up. It's like 30 degrees now, so that's warm for Minneapolis. But it's slowly but surely it's moving into spring. So I had it on when I got home. And it was just
can I get a quick Celsius conversion so I can join in on the joke?
It's like I just do Fahrenheit. It's better.
Damn.
It's not bad. We should change. I don't know. I mean, I understand why we haven't, but living in Korea, like it took me forever to get to the point of Celsius, and then I got back here and I forgot it all, just like in a matter of minutes. So
all your teachings down the tubes.
Jameson, that's -1 Celsius.
Oh, jeez.
I guess that makes sense, yeah, because freezing's 32 and freezing's 0 in Celsius. So yeah, I could have done that. I should have. I need a work on my Celsius conversions.
Oh my god.
Throw a metric joke hidden somewhere as an Easter egg. To everybody that has joined in, not only now, but the same faces that, or not faces, the same names that have appeared in chat today in our comments as they did since day one 5 years ago. Thank you everybody for sticking with Bad Publicity, joining Bad Publicity. Thanks to Boggs for taking the time out on this very birthday occasion.
It was fun. Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll open presents after we go off air. But yeah, thanks everyone for hanging out with us. Really appreciate it. I know I think the stream people said blipped a bit there at the beginning and stuff not, but hey, it happens.
If it didn't happen, it wouldn't be Bad Publicity.
Damn right.
It's your signature.
Forget
it's
it.
Your thing.
That's why we go live all the time.
Yeah.
Michael, any closing words?
No, I hope that everybody's having fun with Katara, and it's been a blast for me. So I hope everyone else has felt the same way.
I think it's safe to say we have. Claps up, yeah. Claps. Oh, multicultural claps in the chat.
Yeah, multicultural claps.
Thanks a bunch, everyone, for hanging out with us. We'll sign off and let Boggs have his night.
See you guys.
Take care.
Take care.
Have a good night.